Now, oh man. That song brings back so many memories, partly for when we played it last week, but when I was a kid, oh man, that's the theme tune to Goodbye Bruce Lee, his last game of death. A very, very strange film. Now, when I was a kid, my first ever obsession, before the Monkees, before anything, when I was about 10, 11 years old, was Bruce Lee. And it was early 80s, home video was kind of happening. We had a Betamax. And it was before like video nasties and stuff, so kids could go in and rent.
My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee.
Oh, blimey,
I was born in...
Scared the life out of me then. It was actual Bruce Lee. You could go in and rent like X-rated films, and if the shop wouldn't let you take it, which was very rare, then your mum and dad would go and rent it. And I was obsessed with Bruce Lee. Loved it. And I had a mate who had loads of Bruce Lee comics and magazines, and we'd photocopy them and sell the photocopy pictures for a penny a piece until we got in trouble and found out. But the problem with Bruce Lee is he only made 4.5 films. And also the films when they were shown in England were really badly cut. But he only made 4.5 films. But luckily, there's this weird phenomenon called Bruceploitation, where after Bruce Lee died, loads of film companies, primarily in Hong Kong and China, but kind of various other places, just found people that, in some cases, looked a bit like Bruce Lee. In most cases, were just Chinese people, you know, and build them as the new Bruce Lee, or Bruce Lee, which is pronounced Lee, or Bruce Le, or Dragon Lee, or however many you can think of. And they made hundreds of these films. And, you know, for kids in the 80s, starving to see more Bruce Lee stuff, they weren't going to get it, he was dead, we kind of latched onto these films. And for a long time, these Bruce Lee films that didn't have Bruce Lee in were a big part of my life. Some of them are absolutely brilliant. Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger, I would suggest, is a masterpiece. Some of them, like that one, Goodbye Bruce Lee, His Last Game of Death, are... well, they're kind of almost unwatchable. Yeah, I would have sat through that film about 20 times when I was 13, 13. Anyway, there's a brilliant Twitter feed at Bruce Lee Clones, and it's run by a gentleman called Michael Worth. And Michael is making a documentary, and I believe writing a book about this whole phenomenon. I've been looking forward to talking to him for ages. Evening, Michael.
Hey, how are you?
I'm very, very well. Now you're in Los Angeles, is that right?
I am in Los Angeles. Yeah, you've been taking me down memory lane. This has been great.
Oh, man. I don't know if you've ever seen a UK edit of the Bruce Lee films. They had all of the nunchuckers cut out.
Yeah, you know, I've got actually plenty because doing, you know, my obsession stages, I would like get them from the UK, some of the cuts, and I was always that was something that always stood out to me. I was like, I go, wait a minute, what happened to the chacos there? So,
well, just I'm going to geek out for 30 seconds. Indulge me, dear listener, then we'll bring it back a bit. The scene in Way of the Dragon where he goes out around the back of the restaurant and gets the double nunchuckers. We didn't see that. No one. We had to pass around dodgy bootleg copies of that scene because it was cut out. He'd go out and then he'd be dusting off and there'd be people lying on the floor.
I know, and that's that image with him with the nunchakos is always like the most iconic. So you guys got ripped off.
We got ripped off. Now listen, tell me how you got into karate and kung fu films.
Well, I was like you, and I was listening to your intro there, and as a 10-year-old, I was studying Aikido already, and I like you fell in love with Bruce Lee and became obsessed with him, and was but at that time, as you were saying, this was sort of right at the start of when Betamax and video was starting. I mean, the only way you could see movies was in the theaters at the sort of tail end of the Grindhouse era and all that. So I didn't know how many movies Bruce Lee had made as a kid. You know, I'd assumed, and I knew Game of Death was like his big mysterious film. And then what happened was a film. I was raised in the Bay Area, which is up by the San Francisco, Berkeley area. And there was a film playing across the bay called The Young Dragon, and I saw the ad for it, and it said Bruce's first film at the age of 18, held back in the vaults of China. And I was sold. So I went over there, paid my $3 to see it. And I just realized within 10 minutes I'd been completely duped. And this was as little as I knew about Bruce Lee. I knew I wasn't looking at Bruce Lee. But by the end of the movie, I was so sucked into this thing. I went home and I was working out for hours, and I was like, that was the best, you know? And so that was kind of like my introduction to it. And to be honest with you, it's sort of, you know, I had to start my own career later in life and not be too, you know, geeked out on this stuff. But I mean, I have just been fascinated with it since I was a kid.
It's weird because he made kind of 4.5 films, and The Game of Death, which is billed as the last Bruce Lee film, in some ways that is a Bruceploitation film because
the biggest. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
The last 20 minutes. The last 20 minutes is Bruce, is the stuff that he filmed, and the hour and a half before that are about 3 different lookalikes, I think, and weird waxworks and weird pictures stuck on mirrors. It's a strange film.
Yeah, I mean, there's some strange ones out there, as you probably noticed, and that one being probably the most accessible one to get at, obviously, because they still sort of tout it as a real Bruce Lee film. But there was a follow-up to it, I don't know if you know, called Tower of Death.
Yeah, of course.
And it actually, even though it's sort of billed as a Game of Death 2, if you watch the movie, it's actually playing more equal to Enter the Dragon. But they did a very similar thing. They took some footage that wasn't used in Enter the Dragon, and they put it in there and tried to make it look like Bruce was in the beginning of it. And in some of the shots he was, but... Go ahead.
I was going to say, when, do you know when Hong Kong, I'm guessing it kind of started in Hong Kong, correct me if I'm wrong, but when they kind of thought, wow, now Bruce Lee's dead, we can make loads of films and pretend it's Bruce Lee. It seems a strange game plan.
Well, believe it or not, actually the Bruceploitation, in a sense, started when he was still alive, because he had done the action scenes for a film called The Unicorn Palm, which starred his friend Unicorn. That was his nickname. Yeah. And Bruce was on set directing some of the action for him. He'd already done a couple of films in Hong Kong. He was already extremely popular, and his star was on the rise. So he went to help his friend make this movie. And when they released the film, this was released while Bruce Lee was still alive, probably right around the time he was doing Enter the Dragon. They would advertise Bruce Lee in all the campaigns, saying directed by him. They started sticking clips from him behind the scenes, doing the choreography into the actual movie itself. Wow. And when it came to America, when it did come here after Bruce Lee had passed away, the first poster would have Bruce Lee on the front, and and they changed the title to Bruce Lee and I, and then they would say directed, and it said directed by Bruce Lee. And I have this poster, but then the lawsuits jumped in, and then the poster immediately changed to almost the same image with some other guy on the front, and then it no longer was called Bruce Lee and I.
It's hard for people to know. I mean, he would have been a massive star in the West. He only really made one American film, Enter the Dragon, and had he gone on to make more, he would have been the action hero in America in the 70s, I think. But
a lot of people don't even realize he was going to be on the Johnny Carson show 2 weeks after he had passed away.
Was he? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And he was huge. I mean, no, huge isn't even the word. He was a phenomenon in Hong Kong and China, wasn't he?
Oh God, yeah. And the thing is, when the Hong Kong films started coming into the UK and America, after he had passed away, everybody was always wanting Bruce Lee films, so a lot of the distributors were like, well, let's just not tell him that he didn't make 4.5 films. Let's just make it look like, you know what I mean? So he became, obviously his name was synonymous with martial arts over here as well.
How many films do you reckon there are with people pretending to be Bruce Lee?
Well, in the book that I've got coming out, I kind of go into this a lot. I mean, there's sort of like very varying degrees of Bruceploitation.
Yeah.
Movies that sometimes just use the advertising, and then of course you go to the film and it's got zero within the film that has anything whatsoever. But then you have, for instance, the 3 guys you mentioned. They're the 3 main Bruceploitation actors, Dragon Lee, Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee. And these guys, pretty much everything they did, with the exception of a few films they did at the end of their careers, where you just knew was Bruceploitation just because they were in it and what they brought to it. But then there's about a half dozen or so people that would come in and do, 1, 2, 3 offs, where they would just do it a few times, something similar. I'd say the era of Bruceploitation really ran from 1973 to about, the early 1980s, so about 10 years. And in that time, you were probably looking at least 50 or 60 films that you could categorize as Bruceploitation.
Bruce Lee, for me, and I know it's pronounced Lee, but I'm saying Lee just for convenience sake. For me, he's the best. I mean, because he looks a bit like Bruce Lee. He looks most like Bruce Lee more than any of the others. He can do the moves to a certain extent, and he seemed to invest kind of a bit more time in his movies than the other guys.
Well, I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, you're right. He did have that look, but he also was of the group. I would say he was the most reticent to do this. He loved Bruce Lee. He just wanted to respect him, and he kind of just took this ride with these producers that kept just throwing him in all this stuff. Sometimes it was good, but most of the time it was really sort of slanderous, sort of salacious, Bruce Lee stuff. And at the end of his career, he walked away basically from his career, and he made a movie. It was like his last film. It was called The Chinese Stuntman, and he directed it. And it was a summation of his career. It was about him being pulled into the film business, getting used, and then he walks away from it. And that's kind of what he wanted to say. You've
just reminded me of a film that I had when I was 12 called Bruce Lee, the Man, the Myth. You talk about libelous films, and it's Bruce Lee doing the story of Bruce Lee, but it's just, I mean, there's there's a brilliant scene where he's dying, and he gets a really bad headache at the actress's house, and you just see him going, "Oh, my head," and it really is. I mean, a lot of these films were stinkers, weren't they?
Well, yeah, and it's funny when you mention just that moment, because that was one of the big mysteries, the big things about Bruce Lee was the fact, he died in this other woman's apartment, and there's always been all this stuff around that. And so it's funny, there are two versions of that sequence, where he's in there and he goes, "Ah, my head," and and she's like, "Let me get you some aspirin." And there's another one, he goes, "Ah, my head. Hey, is your husband coming home soon?" To sort of take away from the fact that maybe it was less than good that he was there. But yeah, I mean, he and to be honest with you, Bruce Lee, the Man, the Myth, which is also known as Bruce Lee, the True Story, I think in the UK, right, was actually one of the better ones that he did about Bruce Lee's life, because he did like 3 or 4 where he played Bruce Lee. And he did some that were just, I mean, the first couple he did, like, and this is where it gets confusing, and it even confuses me sometimes. He has about half a dozen films that all had similar titles. There was A Dragon Dies Hard, there was Dragons Die Hard, there was Super Dragon, there was Dragon Lives, so you had these like combinations of titles that would sometimes be interchangeable, and you were never sure which movie was which. But he did a few that were pretty outrageous, particularly his first one he did, which was called The Dragon Lives. See, I'm already confusing him. Bruce Lee, A Dragon Story, and it was the first one they made, actually. It was the very first one. He's got like a mustache. Bruce Lee has a mustache in it, and there's almost no fighting in it because they still hadn't, they just ran off and made a movie. It was like a soap opera movie about his life. So you dig deep enough, you can find some pretty bad ones that make Bruce Lee, the Man, the Myth look like an Oscar winner.
Michael, stay there. We're going to find out more about your book and your documentary in a second. I've got to take a break. 0844 499 1000. I want to find out as well why we're still talking about Bruce Lee 43 years, I think, after he died. It seems incredible for a man that only made 1 film in Hollywood and 4.5 films in total, that we're still kind of, it's still kids look up to him. It's incredible. I'm Iain Lee. This is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. Listen. Phone. Talk.
Indulge me in a little bit of Friday night geekery and a really weird little cul-de-sac of cinema. Right, it's a strange little offshoot that some of you will be aware of. I think primarily men of a certain age will be aware of, and most of you won't. It's the genre of Bruceploitation. Loads of Bruce Lee films were made, didn't have Bruce Lee in. And Michael Worth, who's a documentary maker and an author and an actor, is talking to me about this from Los Angeles. Michael, I say he's not in them. Actually, in loads of films, there's loads of the Bruceploitation films, there's footage of his funeral, and you actually see dead Bruce Lee in his open casket. And as a kid, I thought, hey, that's cool. As an adult, I think, hey, that's really weird.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that's what it is you and me as kids, when we were watching these films, we wanted to eat that stuff up, but later you do look at it a little oddly. That footage, that funeral footage, was public domain, so that's why it's all over the place. I mean, it's in Kung Fu Fever, it's in Bruce Lee, the Man, the Myth, it's in The Game of Death, it's in the clones of Bruce Lee. You'll see it all over the place. But if you there was a film called The Death of Bruce Lee, and it was with Ron Van Cleef, where he goes to investigate the death of Bruce Lee. And they actually, this is where it went to the ultimate. They actually, on the poster for the movie here in the U.S., they didn't put that shot you're talking about from the funeral. It was actually a picture of Bruce Lee on the autopsy room, and it was a real photo. And they put it on the cover of the poster. Yeah, so they eventually had to pull that off as well. But they pushed it pretty hard back then. And
it's got you'd quite often see it within that footage, film of his wife Linda in tears. What was interesting about it was it seemed the whole of Hong Kong, everybody came out to see the funeral.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the thousands. I mean, those streets were just jam-packed. I mean, he had two funerals. He had that one, which was everybody in Hong Kong, and then, which is why you see so much of the footage, because it got shot so much. And then he did one in Seattle where Steve McQueen and James Coburn and those guys were his pallbearers. But it's interesting to watch how that Hong Kong stuff went, because there were a lot of stars there. I mean, whether you know it or not, at that time, some of the biggest stars in Hong Kong were at that footage. And there's another film actually that Bruce Lee did later, and they used the same idea, because what they would do is they would shoot these things because then they could say so-and-so was in the movie, even though it's just this footage at a funeral or whatever. And Bruce Lee did a movie called Challenge of the Tiger, where they actually went into a party with cameras with Bruce Lee and Jack Klugman and Jane C. party, and he would walk up to him and shake their hand, and then they would film it and they would walk off, and on the poster of the movie it said with Jack Klugman and Jane Seymour.
That's incredible. And it's the cheek of the whole thing, that what you've just said there, showing the funeral, putting Bruce Lee's name on a poster when he's not in it, and films like Bruce Lee Fights Back from Beyond the Grave. It's just the audacity, and I guess it was all about the dollar, wasn't it? It was all about making money.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Okay, now today, I mean, I actually know his family, I know his daughter, I know his wife, and so there's a part of me that like recoils at some of the stuff that I used to really enjoy as a kid. But the thing is, you had the producers on the one hand that were clearly trying to piggyback on Bruce Lee's life and make the money and do whatever they could. But what's also interesting about the film, when you start to kind of understand it, is there's a lot of filmmakers, a lot of choreographers, a lot of martial artists, and a lot of actors that within the film are trying in their own way to either honor Bruce or process his passing in different ways. So, the guys making the films are putting the money in, are looking to make money, but you'll find in the films it varies a lot how they present Bruce Lee, and that's that. So to me, there's within the confines of this Bruceploitation trash sometimes you get on the surface, there is stuff inside that would actually be kind of surprisingly nice to a Bruce Lee fan,
Why are we still talking about Bruce Lee? I think it's 1973, wasn't it? 43 years after he died. Yep. It seems odd, doesn't it, for a man who did only make one Western film, and the other films are great, but I've shown them to people like action movies, and some of them got it and some of them didn't, whereas everyone seems to get Enter the Dragon. Why, so many years later, is he still such a big star?
Well, I'll tell you, when I started working as an actor in this business, it was in the mid-90s, I started doing martial arts films. There was always still, and this is the early 90s, 20 some odd years later, they were still trying to do Bruce Lee stuff in the fight scenes that I would be doing. And it amazed me, like I did this movie with Lorenzo Lamas called Final Impact, and this film Street Crimes with Dennis Farina, and still with the choreography, etc., they were still trying to emulate Bruce Lee. But he, to me, and I think this is pretty much the easy way to peg it, it's like he's like a James Dean. They came along, they made a couple movies, but their charisma was so great. I mean, that you just got magnetized by him. But also Bruce Lee had this other part to him, which is that he was a phenomenal martial artist, and he just left behind this sort of, even with like Game of Death, where we talk about how it got partially filmed, his martial art wasn't even like a completed martial art. It was this evolving philosophical sort of idea for fighting that he never quote unquote finished. So it sort of left all these open curiosity doors, But yeah, I think that's it. I think the guy had a lot of charisma, when you watch him.
Is there anything left in the vaults? I was so thrilled when, God, maybe 10 years ago now, the Game of Death double disc DVD came out, and it had all of the footage that he'd shot, for the film. Most of it we hadn't seen before. Is there anything left in the vaults, Michael, or is it all out there?
No. Actually, there is, and I've seen a little bit of it, and it's so funny because on your point you just made, to this day, people still guard this stuff, hawk on this stuff, hold it in there, and trying to figure out what to do. I can tell you a couple things that I've seen. This is kind of little, but Bruce Lee did a cigarette commercial that he did back when it's popularity for Winston cigarettes, and I've seen it. It exists out there. It's really fast, it's quick, but it's kind of cool,
Yeah.
There's outtakes that exist from his movie Way of the Dragon, the one he did with Chuck Norris. So there's a lot of outtakes that they shot that still exist with that. There's stuff that Bruce Lee did. He shot a lot of things with a video camera he had, with him in the backyard, training people, working on choreography. I've got this one piece of footage. He's not actually in it, but you hear him talking the whole time because he's directing his friend Dan Inosanto through a fight choreography for the Game of Death before they shot it. And it's all on video. And he's in Bruce Lee's backyard, and you hear Bruce Lee yelling at him and saying, "No, do this. Oh, better. That's good." So there's, believe it or not, there's a lot of footage still out there. It's just what happened at that time. It's film that people just didn't really take care of. So people are still digging it up. And I'm going to Hong Kong at the end of November, and for this documentary. But I'll tell you, I'm going to be like asking questions when I get there.
So you make what's the plan? You got the book and the film coming out. Where are you with these, and when can we expect to see them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm an overachiever for sure. I mean, I've got a career that I have, as an actor and a director, and that takes up most of my time. But it's like this. I've always wanted to write a book, so that's how this thing with the book started. I actually started doing it about 8 years ago. I had all these posters and lobby cards and photos that I'd had since I was a kid, and I was pulling them out of my storage. I mean, hundreds. And I said, well, maybe I'll find a book company that would publish like an art book on the Bruce Lee exploitation posters, because they were so just outrageous, some of them. And I wrote a couple publishers, and one said, well, we don't want to do an art book, but if you want to write a story on this, we'll, write a book on this. And I was like, well, no, I don't know. What am I going to write about these things? And then as I started thinking about it, all this stuff started coming to me. And before I know it, I had this 400-page manuscript with this company. And then that turned into working with Severin Films here in the United States to doing this documentary to be a companion to the book. And so we are going, the book will be coming out later this beginning of 2017, as will the documentary, because we're going to leave in end of November. Actually, we're in the air on Bruce Lee's birthday, November 27th, so it's kind of interesting.
Michael,
and then we should have it done by the beginning of 2017.
Listen, the Skype is breaking up just as we get to the half hour mark. So don't worry about it. I'm surprised. I'm surprised it lasted this long. It never normally lasts this long, and it normally goes terribly, terribly wrong. At Bruce Lee Clones is your Twitter feed of people, and you post such wonderful, beautiful lobby cards and posters and things like that. And I suppose if people have got any stuff in their collection, that maybe they should get in touch with you on there and share it with you.
Yeah, if you hit Bruce Lee Clones, that'll focus on the book. If you go to Michael Worth, that'll be talking about more of the movies and stuff I'm doing. Because I do actually, just on this note, I've got a film. It's an action film. We're going to do it at the beginning of middle of next year, so spring. And I'm trying to get a couple of the clones to come be in it. It's a big kind of Expendables martial arts film.
I felt a little twinge.
I'm working on it.
I felt a little twinge downstairs when you said that. Final question.
And Bolo.
And Bolo. Final question. Bruce Lee, have you found him? Do you know where he is? Is he talking?
Well, I will tell you this, and I'll give you the first exclusive. Bruce Lee and Dragon Lee, we've contacted all of them, and so we are hoping to have an interview with each of those guys. And not only that, but we've talked to a bunch of the directors and a lot of the co-stars, and so it's going to be a fun trip to
Michael,
Hong Kong, I'll tell you that.
Michael, I myself am deeply envious. Keep in touch. If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. And I wish you the very best of luck, mate. Thank you for coming on and talking to us. And that's when.
Oh, you bet. I'll get you an autograph. You're going to get an autograph.
Oh, get me a Bruce Lee autograph. Seriously, man. Oh.
I'll work on it, brother. You know I will.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Oh, man. You just heard 15-year-old me then. Oh, I might get a Bruce Lee autograph. Flipping heck. I know it was geeky. Thank you for indulging me on that. I just think it's such a fascinating little subset of cinema. Michael, I really appreciate that. At Bruce Lee Clones.